Good evening and welcome to Conversations in the Void. I'm your host, Joshua Von Ammon. Joining me today is Wanda Dye. Wanda received her bachelor's degree in architecture from Auburn University. She went on to receive her master's degree from Columbia University in New York. Wanda Dye is the founder and director of Gallery and Studio. It's located in the Cedars District of Dallas, next to Homeland Security. Thank you for joining us today, Wanda.
Thank you, Joshua. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start off just by talking a little bit about, what you're doing as a promoter in the arts in the Cedars at the moment and kind of where that project came from.
Well, initially it came from actually teaching. I teach architecture at University of Texas, Arlington, but I'll be commencing teaching in May. But the gallery space was an idea I had a couple years ago to have pop-up shows to show student work that engages what I call re-practices in architecture, art, and design. I teach a course called Re-Practices, and to look at how reclaimed material or recycled material or even repurposed materials can be used across the three disciplines, art, architecture, and design. So it kind of started from that. And then once I progressed further with it, I actually opened the space last November, had the first show where I invited artists, architects, designers from here and all over the country to submit light sculptures or light pieces that use different types of materials that are either repurposed or reclaimed. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of emerged from teaching as well as kind of looking at the arts community as a way to kind of influence architecture and design through innovative use of materials. Mm-hmm. Now that's expanded on to actually focus more on the gallery as a more, I don't want to say commercial-based space, but looking at it for in terms beyond not just exhibition of education and student work, but actually looking at artists in the community. And hence the word studio attached to Gallery. I'm also doing collaborative projects with, I've done work with Team Better Block. My students have done work with Team Better Block. This fall we're working with Make Art with Purpose, where we're actually going to host an exhibition of architecture, urban revitalization projects, but architecture geared towards adaptive reuse of structures. We're going to show Mark Martinick's work. We're going to show Cunningham Architects. They have done a few projects here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And also Team Better Block, we're going to show some of their projects they've done. So hence, the word it expands from architecture, urbanism, and even artists that are doing things with notions of what I call re-practices.
Okay, see, I was wondering about that because I wasn't familiar that was one of the jump-off points with you choosing artists, but thinking about, Arthur Pena and Kelly Croner's processes both doing that. So.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And, I think sometimes people think, just using trash to treasure. It's much more, I think, sophisticated and a little more intellectual and conceptual than that. I find that people that use material that is found or materials that is reclaimed, of course, yes, we can say it's environmentally friendly or going green or whatever, but I think it's a little more layered and kind of has a historical framework that is perhaps not just about being green, but also having kind of longer course of history. We can look at Jasper Johns, you can look at Joseph Cornell, you can look at Robert Rauschenberg. And then, of course, to me, in history of architecture, repurposed buildings have been happening for, ages. Mm-hmm. And so even the house that I'm living in, the gallery space itself is a repurposed idea. Mark Martinick owns it. But I came to him with the idea of putting a gallery into the shotgun shack, which, one could say the whole compound or the whole space of the house is itself a repurposed project or a repurposed work of art. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to pigeonhole it, and I don't want to, think I'm like going green or a tree hugger or anything like that. But I think there's ideas that are layered through history and, again, through aesthetics that I think I'm drawn to these ideas of the reuse of materials in an innovative way. Mm-hmm. So,
Well, it's excellent. I mean, what you've done so far, just with the Ree Gallery itself, has been excellent work, and you've shown you've had some great shows with that. Aside from the fact that you're really one of the major, I think, proponents of the area and the stimulating of the arts in that given area. Just considering that Eli and Kelly are living in your former house with their
Yeah.
space, and then the studio down the street with Mark Martinek, he's doing some great things.
Yeah, I was really strategic in that. I got to know the Cedars about 3 or 4 years ago. I guess it was probably 3.5 years ago. I was a friend of mine, Albert Sherbarth, lived over there, and we started a community garden, and that's where I met Mark Martinek before I met Albert, but we all kind of really enjoyed the community garden. I was still living in Arlington, but eventually I moved over to the Cedars into a house that Patrick Collins owns over there. And I stayed there for a year, and I downsized to move across the street into Mark's homes because I just loved the proportions of the shotgun shack, and it was a little more economical for me to move over there.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I got the idea for the gallery to go into that space next door, I think Mark and I worked on that house all summer to get it ready to open in November. I was really strategic in choosing tenants next door
Mm-hmm.
for him to look at or to suggest to him
Mm-hmm.
that, I would want artists to be here because of the idea of having 3 openings a month or 3 events a month. You don't want somebody complaining about your space, but I also wanted them to contribute, and I also liked them as individuals, and I loved Kelly's work. I was doing a show. I'd already booked a show with her. And so it all was very organic, and, the Quonset huts became available, and Mark acquired those. And I said, you should put artists in here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was already into that anyway and made suggestions to that. But, I was really avid about recruiting, you guys to be over there because, one, transportation-wise, and it's really convenient. And it's, again, trying to bring more artists in that neighborhood that, artists have been there for 30 years already.
Mm-hmm.
Why not even bring in more?
Sure.
And try to really foster that area. And I don't think it's ever going to get overdeveloped, knock on wood. But I think there is a momentum, or I won't say a renaissance, but there's some good momentum happening with you guys coming into the neighborhood. So, hopefully good things to come. So.
And do you have any other projects coming up in the near future?
Excuse me. I have shows booked until January. The upcoming show, Kelly Croner is up now, and it's closing Saturday, so stop by if you guys are around this weekend. Having a closing reception Friday evening, the 6th, from 6 to 9. And then the next show is going to be Kristen Cochran. That's Friday, April 12th. We have an opening reception from 6 to 9 for her. And what I try to do with my openings, I have an opening, and then I have an artist talk / potluck to try to, again, make it more communal. And then I have a closing, so I try to get people to come back to the space. After Kristen Cochran, I have Jack Sanders from Austin. He's a design, build, fabricator, and artist.
Mm-hmm.
He's done work at El Cosmico and Marfa. He worked at the Rural Studio at Auburn. He also co-produced Citizen Architect, a film about Samuel Mockbee in the Rural Studio.
Mm-hmm.
After Jack, I'm having a group show on drawing and painting called The Ordinary and the Everyday. Have local artists like Peter Ligon in that. Hopefully Lucy Kirkman, a woman from Austin, Sarah Elizabeth Stevens, and a few others. July, I'm having Samantha McCurdy and Alex DiGiulio, 2 other SCAB members. They're going to have a collaborative, solo collaborative show.
Cool.
And then August, I'm really excited about this. I have a show called Going Postal, and we'll have post art or mail art, postal art. Gary Fairley sending me a postcard, handmade postcard from Ireland, like every couple of weeks. So I'll have all those until August, and then along with Gary will be Sam Schonzeit from Marfa, and John Pomara is going to put some pieces in there. Ben Schonzeit, Sam's dad from New York, will be in the postal show as well. And maybe Michael Kors, we're talking about it. He might have some post art as well, so we'll see. And then September, a gentleman, young artist that just graduated from UNT, Ben Terry. I'm going to have a solo show for him. And then October show is going to be the Make Art with Purpose, the Urban Revitalization and Adaptive Reuse Architecture
Cool.
group show.
Well, we'll definitely have to have links for, these the events coming up soon.
Yeah, it's a lot going on.
Yeah, it
I'm out
sounds
of
like
breath
it.
now.
Well,
So,
we're running out of time now, but it was great to have you on the show.
thank you. It's a pleasure. Y'all have been wonderful to work with.
Thank you. Thank you. So, hope to see you again soon.
Thank
Maybe
you.
catch you in the fall.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in.
I think Elspeth Whitmore was the only true genius I've ever met. She lived a short life, but genius removes one from the normal flow of time, and she developed more quickly than ordinary children. She lived in the big white two-story on Rotary Drive, and her parents were nice but aloof. Neither of them spoke French, and yet their rather sizable library, itself something of an oddity in a tiny logging community, contained a number of expensive volumes printed in French, mostly consisting of medieval verse and nursery rhymes. Elspeth taught herself to read by the time she was 3, and her favorite book in those formative years was an illustrated collection entitled Les Folies d'Animaux, in which animals are capable of speech and tackling human problems. Around the age of 5, Elspeth began attending classes in Miss Davis's one-room schoolhouse, the closest thing our town had to offer to an education system, and we met. She was the youngest person in class by several years. We were friends for the rest of her life, mostly, I think, because I was the only person who never made fun of her. So while we dull children were struggling with arithmetic, Elspeth developed a passion for late Roman history and learned Latin as a consequence. She read every book in town and then read them all again. She gave new names to things, people, animals, sometimes in French, sometimes in Latin, and often in a hybrid language that made little sense to anyone but her. From the time she was old enough to venture out by herself, she spent most of her time in the woods, cataloging plants and insects. She loved animals, who she named after knights and mythical kings. Sometimes a family dog or pig would follow her through the tree line. Once she went missing overnight, and all the men in town scoured the forest for hours before they found her, sleeping pressed into the hollow of an ancient oak, wreathed beneath the fuzzy nimbus of fireflies. Elspeth was always writing, a furious scribbler, as they say, until her mother, who thought it frivolous, abjured her from doing so in public. She always told me that she had been adopted and that her father was an expatriate prince of Prussia or France. The story changed over the years, but she often told me that he would never have stood for the way her mother mistreated her. I don't know how she meant that, but their relationship was always cold, and our teacher, Miss Davis, became more of a mother to Elspeth. She would often leave scrap paper and crayons or pencils under the stairs of the schoolhouse for Elspeth to take with her in secret. Elspeth was always looking into the middle distance, except once when Stephen Dwyer called her crazy in class. Then she stared in stony silence at Stephen until he studied only the shoes beneath his desk, and Miss Davis eventually suggested we all return to our work. I think it was shortly after that she, Elspeth, began to have fainting spells. She would be walking along or describing a plant in her hushed and dulcet voice, and suddenly her eyes would roll back into her head and she would collapse. Once she hit her head on the edge of a desk and had to stay in bed for a week, though she seemed to stabilize a bit after that. More and more as she entered her teenage years, Elspeth was in the woods. Her mother grew increasingly exasperated that her young and infirm daughter was traipsing alone through the lawless forest or fishing just upriver from the sawmill. I don't know if she would have been relieved or further scandalized to know how often I went with Elspeth and how many secret places we shared. To avoid her mother's ire, we gave up meeting each other in town or on the road into the woods where the logging trucks jostled and bumped and got stuck in the mud. There were places in the woods that only we knew how to find, that she named, and where we would go to meet each other. Our favorite clearing was the cathedral, an island in the sylvan sea of pines with a dead and hollow tree fallen at its center. She didn't want me to know, but I knew that in that hollow log was a wooden box containing everything Elspeth had ever written. She never offered to let me read anything, so I eventually stopped asking, but she was often there, scratching at bits of old wrapping paper with the nub of a pencil. One day in spring, I went there to look for her. When I entered the cathedral, I thought she had hanged herself. Her feet were dangling 1.5 feet above the ferns, and she was slowly spinning with her arms outstretched, pirouetting like a music box ballerina through the empty air, which had taken on a slow, thick quality like honey. The light congealed around her like sap into amber as it came down in shafts between the pines and the oak trees. There was a sound, or the feeling of a sound, of bells, very distant but perfectly clear. They were harmonious and discordant in the same instant. Only the whites of her eyes shone, and her mouth was open slackly. Her long dark hair floated around her as she spun, as though she were under water. The coarse dark hair and streaks of mud served to make her legs look very dark beneath the faded purple and dirty white of her skirt. She didn't appear to be breathing. I realized that she was still rising, inch by inch, towards the treetops, and I stepped forward through the clearing towards her. I put a hand out with the intention of pulling her down like a wayward balloon, but stopped a few inches short of touching her. She looked so beautiful and so terrible in that impossible state that I was afraid that I would be pulled into whatever ethereal realm had captured her, or that some force would reach out through her and knock me back. So I was standing with my fingers an inch from her bare feet when she fell roughly into my arms, knocking us both to the mossy ground. Her eyes rolled forward and she came to. She actually laughed, thinking that she had just suffered an ordinary spell. She didn't remember anything. I belabored the point, asking if she was all right, if she could recall a single thing from before she fainted. We lay there on the ground for a long time as the light died, and I skirted the questions I really wanted to ask. Eventually, she had enough and with a giggle said, "Cole, you worry too much. Don't you know what you are?" and laid a handful of dirt on my chest as it slowly rose and fell. At Elspeth's funeral, Miss Davis was inconsolable. It's always painful when a young person dies, especially all of a sudden. But of course, Elspeth had been walking along the road into the woods and fainted again, falling into a ditch by the wayside, and a chain had snapped on the back of a passing truck, unleashing an avalanche of dead trees over Elspeth where she lay. She was crushed completely, crushed into the earth, and whatever had lived inside of her was crushed out of her body forever. In a well-practiced gesture signifying nothing, the town chaplain dropped a clump of dirt onto the black lacquered lid of her casket from fingers gone withered and dry, white like the twigs of an aspen. The next day I went back to our cathedral in the woods to pull that box from its resting place in that hollow log. The woods were just themselves again, and the light was boring. I held a deep sadness that felt bigger than death. I opened the box, and every page inside was unreadable. They were all written in a private code only Elspeth Whitmore had understood. She was a genius, after all. But I brought the box home, and it still sits there, these many years later, in a room off the main hallway where I keep junk and old furniture. Most of the time they're just ordinary writing, those indecipherable letters she invented, but through the cracks in the wood, sometimes at night I swear I see them glowing.